Thanks for staying with us. You're watching The World Now. Let's turn our attention now to Africa. The Director General of the World Trade Organization, Dr. Okonjo Iweala, has called on African leaders to stop relying on foreign aids and focus on mobilizing domestic resources to attract investment and drive economic growth. Dr. Okonjo Iweala emphasized that African leaders need a mindset shift, saying the continent is blessed with vast untapped financial and natural resources that could drive sustainable development. While speaking on the sidelines of the African Union meeting in Ethiopia, the WTO chief advised that foreign aid should be considered a thing of the past. The former Minister of Finance also called for the recapitalization of Africa's multilateral development banks, including the African Finance Corporation. She also said this would expand their balance sheets and increase funding for key projects. Joining me for this conversation is political analyst Amuda Musiburi. He joins me via Zoom from Ibadan. Good to have you join us, Amuda.
Thank you so much for having me.
So this statement coming from the WTO chief is coming just after a few weeks or few days after the statement made by Donald Trump on ending foreign aid to certain countries and agencies. I just want to get your reaction to it. It's not the first time it's been made, but coming from someone as Dr. Okonjo Iweala seems, a bit weighty.
Definitely. Now, I think we must understand the fact that aids, foreign aids, or whatever nomenclature you want to give to them, have actually been identified as a double-edged sword. There are positive impacts and there are negative impacts. And we know that to a large extent, in the case of Africa, foreign aids have done more harm than good, and that is why in a wonderful treatise written by I think Moyo in 2017, she called foreign aid dead aid because of the litany of problems that foreign aids come with. And if you place that or just suppose that with what Donald Trump said, it means that it is high time African leaders began to look inward. Now, the overdependence on foreign aid has made us shut our eyes to a lot of things. So, the great elements, and of course that we have within Africa. Talk of intra-African trade, for instance, we have overlooked that. Now, one of the dangers of foreign aid, let me quickly point that out, is the fact that it kills local production. With high foreign aid, now, for instance, the countries receiving foreign aids in grain, it means that the grain farmers in the country will definitely be thrown out of markets. And this extends to a lot of other areas. And this is why we've had the under-industrialization of Africa, reduction in intra-continental trade in Africa, as well as the depletion of the middleman class, which is a major class that is necessary for any developmental project globally. So this is why I feel that the like of Dr. Okonjo Iweala is coming up now to say that Africa needs to begin to look inward. Enough of looking outward, because it has really not done much good in terms of,
It's interesting that you mentioned Dr. Dambisa Moyo's book, Dead Aid. And if you remember, it had a serious backlash, even at that time, from donor organizations, and most especially the world's richest man at the time. We have had this very prolonged reliance on foreign aid. We've been receiving aid in Africa since 1896. How do you break away from that dependency syndrome?
Well, it's quite easy. All that African countries particularly need to do is, like I said, look inward. Now, look at the quantum of intracontinental trade in Africa. Africa has the second least intracontinental trade. That's aside Latin America. And what Africa lacks, Latin America makes up for it. While Latin America has less than about 20%, Africa has just between 25% in terms of the quantum of trade within the continent compared to what goes outside. The West, for instance, Western Europe has almost about 70%, Asia has 60-something%, and North America has over 40%. Now, it means that we need to begin to look inward. Now, you also look at the balance of trade in Africa as well, what we export. So African countries would export cocoa, and then we'll still import, beverage, which means that the balance of trade is not in our favor. If you are exporting about, say, $85 million annually or $85 million annually, and then you are importing $84 million annually, then your balance of trade is definitely problematic in this area. So what we need to do is wrap up our industrialization efforts. We need to also begin to look at, a lot of credit schemes that governments in Africa need to create, and then promote this intra and continental trade. Now, this is the beauty of intracontinental trade. If we are trading with our neighbors, for instance, let's use Nigeria and, of course, our West African neighbors, it means that a lot of bottlenecks that would have sufficed when it comes to having to trade with, countries in other continents are already removed. And when you are developing your own stuff in your country, you are producing, you're not just a primary producer, you have also become a tertiary producer.
Absolutely.
You have been able to remove the context of satellization, which is one of the things that neocolonialism, drives on. So you're no longer a satellite country. You're not a producing country. You're in the main economy. You're also driving fast with other countries.
I want to quickly jump in because I want to take a detour to another conversation that came up, which I found also very interesting, that came up at that summit. And that's coming from our own President Tinubu, where he raised concerns over the instability in Libya and then its impact on the Sahel region. But for me, very concerning was the fact that he called on the African Union to support peace initiatives in conflict-affected areas. I also wanted to get your thoughts as to why we are not seeing African Union in terms of peace efforts and diplomatic solutions to conflicts in Africa.
I think the major challenge has also been this foreign aid. Now, if the African Union had been strong, let's take a cue from how ECOWAS was. I mean, let's say pre-2000, we saw how ECOWAS, for instance, played a major role in conflict resolution across West Africa. Now, the African Union would have, in fact, the whole essence of the formation of African Union and the transition from OAU to the AU was to create a more virile role. However, with the African Union in place, we did not have a Security Council, for instance, that would see to nipping in the bud crisis situation. Now, the danger of what happened in Libya, for instance, is enormous. So we've seen the implication in countries like Nigeria, we've seen it in Mali, we've seen it in other countries across the Sahel, and so on. So there is a need for the AU to do beyond waiting for what is going to come from the West, or the West.
I am being told. I'm sorry. I do apologize, Amuda, for butting in, but my time is up. Thank you so much for your contribution as always. Political and global affairs analyst Amuda Musibodi.